1. 55-year-old male presented with dyspnea on exertion, palpitations, and angina symptoms, particularly at night time. On examination, Bispherians pulse was present and there was early diastolic murmur at left third intercostal area. What is your clinical diagnosis? So let's see how to approach this topic of valvular heart disease. So as a combined, it is a valvular heart disease. So how to go about the clinical approach? So most important is always the symptoms of any particular disease. And we will pick particular symptom of a particular condition. So we will ask these questions: why it is aortic regurgitation, what are the causes, what are the pressure volume curves, what are the pathologies of valvular heart disease, investigation and treatment. So let's start with why it is aortic regurgitation. That means the clinical approach. Symptom wise, if we look at the symptoms of a particular valvular heart disease, if symptom of hemoptysis is given, it will point towards, it will be pointing towards the mitral stenosis, MS. So one key symptom, hemoptysis, mitral stenosis. There is one important question: what is the most common source of bleeding in mitral stenosis? Remember, it will be a venous source and it is the bronchial vein which are more common as a source of hemoptysis. Then the symptom of nighttime angina. This is a very peculiar symptom of aortic regurgitation. So in the clinical question, just mark nocturnal angina, it will be aortic regurgitation. While if a symptom of fatigue is given, that will be because of low cardiac output. And very interestingly, in mitral regurgitation, initial symptom is fatigue due to low cardiac output initially. While if the symptom of syncope is given, this will point towards the aortic stenosis. So this is how we'll make the tentative diagnosis based on the symptoms with which patient is presenting with. So here in our clinical question, nocturnal angina is mentioned, so it points toward the aortic regurgitation. Now look at the clinical signs. So in the clinical sign, we have basic clinical signs of pulse and the murmur. So on the basis of these two simple clinical signs, we can make a accurate diagnosis. So there are two important types of pulse. One is a Bispherians pulse. Bispherians pulse basically is 2 peaks in systole. So it can be a diagram based question also. In the Bispherians pulse, we will see 2 peaks in the systole like this. So this is S1, this is S2. So between S1 and S2, here is a systole, 2 peaks are felt. This is Bispherians pulse and it is highly characteristic of severe aortic regurgitation. So in our clinical case, Bispherians pulse was mentioned. So again, it points towards the AR diagnosis. While the second characteristic pulse is a parvus et tardus. What does it mean? Parvus means a low amplitude, at means late, and tardus means peak. So there is a low amplitude and late peaking like this. There is a late peaking towards the S2 sound. Usually the peak agar in the mid systole, but it is shifted and the amplitude is also low. It indicates that there is some obstruction to the ventricle outflow. So that will be more suggestive of aortic stenosis. So two important pulses, Bispherians and parvus et tardus. Now coming to the murmurs. So what are the types of different murmurs? We can classify these murmurs according to the timings. So murmur can be classified as a murmur of systole. That means it will be between S1 and S2, or it can be diastole between S2 and S1. Systolic murmur can be ejection systolic murmur. So ejection systolic murmur, if we look at the diagram of ejection systolic murmur, could be a diagram based question also. This is S1, this is S2. And here is the opening of semilunar valve, somewhere here. So this you know in the physiology that between S1 and the opening of semilunar valve, it is a isovolumetric contraction. So here the ejection, during the ejection phase, turbulence is occurring. What is the meaning of ejection? Ejection means the blood is going from ventricle to the blood vessels. So there will be a turbulence after semilunar valve open, and that turbulence will peak usually in the mid-systole and then show a decreasing trend. So this is a ejection systolic murmur, crescendo, decrescendo murmur, also known as mid-systolic murmur because the peak is in the mid-systole. There are two important valvular diseases which can lead to ejection systolic murmur: aortic stenosis and pulmonary stenosis. That means stenosis of the semilunar valves. While second systolic murmur can be a pan-systolic murmur, and if we can understand with the help of a diagram, pan-systolic. As the name suggests, full systole, the murmur will be heard S1, S2, and this murmur start from S1 and ends till S2, like this. Almost a uniform murmur, and some books says holosystolic murmur as well. Regarding the valvular heart disease, it will be the mitral regurgitation and tricuspid regurgitation. So how to remember this? Whatever is the left-sided valvular defect, same murmur will be produced by the right-sided valvular defect of that particular valve. While diastolic murmur can be early diastolic murmur. So if we make a diagram of early diastole, this is S2, this is S1. Here is the opening of AV valve. So this early diastolic murmur start with S2 and shows a decreasing trend like this, occupy the early part of the diastole, early diastolic murmur. Two reasons, only two reasons: regurgitation of semilunar valves like aortic regurgitation and pulmonary regurgitation. And just for naming purposes, aortic regurgitation murmur will be known as Key-Hodgkins murmur. So this murmur, primary murmur of AR, will be known as Key-Hodgkins murmur. And do not confuse it with the Austin-Flint murmur. Austin-Flint murmur is not the primary murmur of AR. It is due to the secondary effect. It is due to the complication of AR. So primary murmur, early diastolic of AR, is known as Key-Hodgkins, while the murmur of pulmonary regurgitation will be known as the Graham-Steele's murmur. A very, very popular question, Graham-Steele's murmur. Pulmonary regurgitation. Now coming to the mid-diastolic murmur. So mid-diastolic murmur occupy the mid-diastole like this. This is the opening of the AV valve and this is S1. So this start after the opening of the AV valve, shows a slight decreasing trend, and just before systole, increasing trend. Pre-systolic accentuation. So this will be the morphology of a mid-diastolic murmur. Two valvular defects will be there: mitral stenosis and tricuspid stenosis. So in our case, patient has got nocturnal angina symptom, patient has Bispherians pulse examination, and patient has the early diastolic murmur. So all goes in favor of aortic regurgitation. And area is also important. The area of aortic regurgitation will be Ubbs area, that is a third intercostal space on the left side. Just parasternal area will be the murmur area of aortic regurgitation. So this answer our first question, ki why it is aortic regurgitation. All of you must have said in the beginning that it is AR, but why it is AR? This is the approach, how to make a clinical diagnosis of different valvular heart disorders. Now, what are the causes of different valvular diseases? So the causes can be given in the clinical history, like a patient is a case of say RHD, patient is elderly, something like that, they will be given. So that will be additional clue in making a diagnosis. So the causes of the murmurs, different types of valvular heart disease, we can classify as a right-sided lesion or a left-sided lesion. So starting with the first one, right-sided lesion, tricuspid stenosis. The most common cause is RHD. Indeed, hardly there is any other cause of tricuspid stenosis. So RHD is responsible for maximum cases of TS. For tricuspid regurgitation, the most common cause is right ventricle dilatation. So what happens when right ventricle dilate? The tricuspid leaflet gets separated from each other. So it is not the primary valvular lesion which is causing the TR. It is the right ventricle dilatation. And why right ventricle dilatation is occurring? Because of underlying cause. For example, cor pulmonale, or maybe pulmonary embolism. They put a strain on the right ventricle and right ventricle can stretch or dilate, leading to TR. While pulmonary stenosis, the most common cause are the congenital causes. Pulmonary regurgitation is because of the pressure of pulmonary artery hypertension. This is the most common cause. Mitral stenosis, most common cause is RSD. MR, most common cause is RSD. Remember, this is worldwide, the most common cause of MR is RSD, though in Western population it is mitral valve prolapse. So whenever question comes, assume it to be a world or assume it to be an Indian cause. So it will be rheumatic heart disease as the most common cause of mitral regurgitation. While aortic stenosis is calcification, which can be age-related calcification, or for aortic regurgitation, it is a age-related degeneration of the valve that is the most common cause of the aortic regurgitation. Here, one more important question comes about the carcinoid syndrome. So carcinoid produce serotonin, and that serotonin affect the right-sided valves because serotonin is almost degraded in the lungs, so it is not able to reach the left side. So we see right-sided murmur, and most common murmur due to carcinoid syndrome is tricuspid regurgitation. Remember this, the most common cardiovascular lesion due to carcinoid is tricuspid regurgitation. This is an important question, tricuspid regurgitation. So these are the causes of different valvular disorders. Now, the third question will be answered by Dr. Anupma, the pressure volume curves of different valvular lesions. Yeah, Dr. Anupma. Dr. Anupma, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Arvind. And I was also listening to you so carefully, and there's so much to learn every time you speak. And so let me just
same here, ma'am. I also get to learn from your physiology.
Yes. So this is a left ventricular pressure volume loops, which are very commonly asked as far as the Central Institute exams are concerned. So let's revise them, and we normally do it in class as well. So let's do this left ventricular pressure volume loop. Okay. Okay, all right. So now when you look at the left ventricular pressure volume loop, what you have on the x-axis is the left ventricular volume in milliliters, and left ventricular pressure in millimeters of mercury is on the y-axis. So starting from point A, now point A here is the end of diastole, and you know already that the diastole is a period of filling. So what do I expect the left ventricular volume here? The left ventricular volume is close to 120 ml. This is the maximum volume. It has been filled with blood during diastole. The volume is at 120 and the pressure is approximately between 5 and 10. Now at this point, the moment the left ventricular pressure becomes higher than the left atrial pressure, there is a closure of the mitral valve. The mitral valve closes at this point, and this gives rise to the first heart sound. The mitral valve will close here and gives rise to the first heart sound. And closure of the mitral valve means onset of systole. Onset of systole, the first phase of systole, isovolumetric contraction phase. So A to B is isovolumetric contraction phase. What happens in isovolumetric contraction? The mitral valve is closed. The aortic valve has not yet opened. Left ventricle is a closed chamber and it begins to contract. There is a rapid rise in pressure with no change in volume. This is your isovolumetric contraction phase, a rapid rise in pressure till the left ventricular pressure reaches 80. 80 millimeters of mercury is the diastolic pressure in the aorta. So as soon as the LV pressure exceeds the diastolic pressure in the aorta, there is now, it literally pushes the aortic valve open. So this is the point where the aortic valve opens at point B. Aortic valve opens here and opening will not produce a sound, so you do not hear any sound over here. Now, the moment aortic valve opens, now starts the period of ejection. Blood will move from the left ventricle into the aorta, and there are two phases of the ejection phase. There is a rapid ejection phase and there is a slow ejection phase. Rapid ejection phase, there is a rapid rise in pressure in the left ventricle and also a rapid decrease in volume of the left ventricle. Please understand, we are looking at the LV pressure volume changes. So there is a decrease in the volume of the left ventricle. What about the slow ejection phase? Though of course we cannot really demarcate where does the rapid ejection phase end and the slow ejection phase start, because you do not have time here in the picture. But we do know that in the slow ejection phase, there is the LV pressure begins to fall. Why does it begin to fall? Is because by this time now the LV is more or less empty. Most of the blood has gone into the aorta. Not completely empty, but relatively with less volume of blood. So the left ventricular pressure begins to fall, the left ventricular volume is decreasing as soon as the LV pressure becomes lower than the aortic pressure. Please understand, the opening and closure of valves depends on the pressure difference of the two chambers. So as soon as the LV pressure becomes lower than the aortic pressure, the aortic valve closes. Aortic valve closes, and this gives rise to the second heart sound, which marks the end of systole. So starting from A, onset of systole, A to B, isovolumetric contraction phase, B to C is the ejection phase. A to C is systole. S1 at A, S2 at C. Now from C now starts the phase of diastole. The aortic valve is closed, mitral valve has not yet opened, left ventricle is a closed chamber, sharp fall in pressure with no change in volume. This is the isovolumetric relaxation phase. The moment the LV volume, the LV pressure becomes lower than the LA pressure, the moment the LV pressure becomes lower than the LA pressure, the mitral valve will be forced open. So this is the point. At point D, the mitral valve opens. Mitral valve opens, now starts a phase of filling. Blood from the left atrium will come into the left ventricle. There is going to be an increase in the LV volume with very little change in pressure. And the reason for why there is a little change in pressure is because of the fact that LV, the ventricles are compliant chambers. They tend to distend as they are being filled with blood. So there is very little change in the pressure. The moment the LV pressure exceeds the LA pressure, mitral valve will close and the first heart sound and the next cardiac cycle starts. So once again, mitral valve closes at A, aortic valve opens at B, aortic valve closes at C, and mitral valve opens at D. And there is a little mnemonic here for that. And I always want you to remember your physio ma'am. So ma'am Coco, yes. So at point A, mitral valve closes. At point B, aortic valve opens. At C, aortic valve closes. At D, mitral valve opens. But I always give you a little warning here. Please remember where is A, B, C, D. If you mix up that, then obviously this mnemonic will go for a toss. So you need to remember that. And remember A to B, isovolumetric contraction, B to C, ejection phase, C to D, isovolumetric relaxation, D to A is the period of filling. A to C is systole, C to A is diastole. Another very important information that you get from the left ventricular pressure volume loop is the width of the loop. The width of the loop coincides with stroke volume. The width of the loop gives you an idea about the stroke volume. What is stroke volume? End diastolic volume. End diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. This is stroke volume. There was a question which was asked in AIIMS where you were asked to calculate the ejection fraction from the left ventricular pressure volume loop. And what is the ejection fraction? Stroke volume, that is from the width of the loop divided by the end diastolic volume. In case you want it in a percentage, then multiply this by 100. This is your ejection fraction. You have got a question where you were asked to calculate the ejection fraction. Another another thing which you can, another information that you can gather from this loop is this loop will also give you an idea about the pulse pressure. The height, the maximum height here coincides with the systolic blood pressure, and point B is the diastolic blood pressure. And what is systolic minus diastolic? This is the pulse pressure. So you can also get an idea about the pulse pressure from the LV pressure volume loop. Let's go on to the slides, what happens in the case of different valvular lesions. Now, this is a very typical loop that you see in, this is a tall and a narrow loop. Number one, the moment you get a narrow loop means this is where the stroke volume is reduced. Stroke volume is reduced would be a stenotic lesion. So a tall and a narrow loop is typically seen in aortic stenosis. Why is it a tall loop? Because now the LV has to, the left ventricle has to exert more pressure to open a stenosed valve. So you get a tall and a narrow loop, right? So this is typically seen in aortic stenosis. Let's have a look at another one. Now, this is again has been asked in an AIIMS exam. You were given an image and you were asked to identify the valvular lesion. Now, this is a shift of the loop to the left. Shift of the loop to the left is characteristically seen. Again, it's a narrower loop. And whenever you have a narrower loop, that indicates a stenotic lesion. Now, here is, what has happened here is the end diastolic. There is a decrease in the end diastolic volume here. There is a shift of the loop to the left. This is, if the decrease in end diastolic volume means now the LV is not getting completely filled with blood, mitral valve is therefore stenosed. This is typically seen in MS, a shift of the loop to the left. Let's have a look at another one. Now here is a loop where you are seeing it's a broad loop. Stroke volume has increased. Stroke volume has increased, right? Now, stroke volume increases would mean a regurgitant lesion. A regurgitant lesion, now the aortic regurgitation, MR. Two of them we have to identify here. Now, the moment you see a wide loop like this, it's a regurgitant lesion, but the one feature which will help you to identify, look at the isovolumetric relaxation phase. Isovolumetric relaxation phase. Normally, this should be a straight line. There should be no change in volume of the left ventricle during isovolumetric relaxation phase. Now, what has happened here is, now in this case, this is typically seen in aortic regurgitation here. Let me try and explain why. Now, this point where the aortic valve closes. Now, obviously, because it's an incompetent valve, it is not closing properly. Blood regurgitates back into the left ventricle. So where I should have got a straight line, no change in volume of the left ventricle during isovolumetric relaxation, I see this line slanting towards the right side. There is an increase in the volume of the left ventricle during isovolumetric relaxation phase. It's a slant of the line to the right. Of course, a huge increase in end diastolic volume. There is a large increase in stroke volume. All those are also pointing towards a regurgitant lesion. But what is actually one feature which should help you to distinguish between AR and MR? Isovolumetric relaxation phase. So let's see what is going to happen in the isovolumetric relaxation phase of MR. Of course, the moment you look at the loop, you know this is a massive increase in stroke volume. This is a regurgitant lesion. Now, how do I say this is MR? Now, in the isovolumetric relaxation phase. Now, in AR, we saw that it was a slant to the right. But what do we see over here? Initially, in isovolumetric relaxation phase, there is a decrease in the LV volume followed by an increase. Why a decrease in LV volume during isovolumetric relaxation phase? Because now what has happened in MR is the mitral valve, which should have been closed, is incompetent. So what happens during isovolumetric relaxation is some blood regurgitates from the left ventricle into the left atrium. Please remember, movement of blood is always from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So even though the LV is in a state of relaxation, the pressures are higher than the LA pressures, which are extremely low. So pressure in the left ventricle is still higher than the LA pressure. So what happens is some blood regurgitates from the LV into the LA, producing an initial decrease in the LV volume. But as soon as the LA pressure becomes higher than the LV pressure, blood goes back into the left ventricle, followed by an increase in LV volume. So this is the difference that you find in AR and MR. In AR, it was a slant to the right in isovolumetric relaxation phase, only an increase in LV volume during isovolumetric relaxation. But in MR, you find an initial decrease in the LV volume, followed by, so initially the line slants towards the left, followed by an increase in LV volume, and the isovolumetric relaxation line slanting towards the right. Right? So just briefly, look at this, the 4 loops, tall and narrow loop, aortic stenosis, shift of loop to left, mitral stenosis, isovolumetric relaxation, this is a regurgitant lesion, isovolumetric relaxation, slant to the right, AR, initial decrease in LV volume, followed by an increase in LV volume during isovolumetric relaxation phase, MR. That is from my side, Dr. Arvind, please carry on. Thank you.
Fantastic, ma'am. So it also opened my mind to now correlate the valvular disease with the physiology aspect. Very nice presentation, ma'am. So coming to the next discussion of valvular heart disease, it will be the important pathologies of valvular heart diseases. So, Dr. Sanjeev.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Arvind. It was so nice to listen to Anupama ma'am's the pressure volume curves. I hope I had a physiology teacher in my college like you. Yeah, so about the current case was a aortic regurgitation. The current case was the aortic regurgitation, and actually in regurgitations in pathology we will not see much. So basically I am showing you few gross images of the valvular diseases which are important for your exams. So first is, I am talking about aortic valvular stenosis, which is a calcific stenosis. So what is happening in calcific stenosis? The one very important thing, cusps are involved in this. So there is calcification happening in the cusps. Very, very important to note, there will be no commissural fusion that is happening. So look at this, the commissures are, so I'm marking here, they are free, they are not fused, and there is formation of calcification. I hope all of these, the black arrows that I have pointed out, these are the calcified areas. And there can be metaplastic bone formation that can be seen in the calcific aortic valvular stenosis. Similarly, there is one more that will be the mitral annular calcification. The name itself is suggesting the calcification is not happening right in the cusps. So cusps are not involved here. Cusps are not involved here. There will be calcification of the annulus that is there. Now look at this. This is your cusps that we are talking here. The calcification is not near the cusp. It is at the periphery where there is an annulus. No commissural fusion, obviously, because there is nothing near the commissures. In contrast, so very important, if they give you an exam, they can give you either a calcific aortic valvular stenosis or one more will be a rheumatic stenosis. Rheumatic aortic stenosis, look at this, this is a rheumatic aortic stenosis which will show commissural fusion. This is because primarily there's a lot of inflammation happening and there'll be fibrosis happening. That is why, look at the commissures, they are fused here. Commissural fusion has happened, and that is what is your, how to differentiate between the rheumatic stenosis and the aortic, the calcified aortic stenosis. So these were the only 3 important slides that would have come from, basically expected from the valvular heart diseases. Now I'll hand it over back to Dr. Arvind sir, and we'll be coming back again for different diseases subsequently.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sanjeev. It was a nice presentation for these valvular heart disease and how to make a differential diagnosis, whether it is calcific or a rheumatic origin. Now, next in our list of discussing the valvular heart disease will be the investigations. And in the investigation will be the chest X-ray and the ECG. And I think the chest X-ray will be which is asked is of mitral stenosis mainly. So I will hand over to Dr. Sumer for X-ray of mitral stenosis, and then I will take over the ECGs in different valvular heart diseases.
So thank you, Dr. Arvind. I think all of you have discussed this wonderfully. And in radiology, I think the only important X-ray in rheumatic heart disease is mitral valvular disease. And only three things to see here are, number one, the predominant valve that is involved is mitral valve. So when the mitral valve is involved, all the X-ray features will be because of left atrial enlargement. The X-ray features are because of left atrial enlargement. So earliest feature will be this bulge in the left auricle. This is what is your third Mughal sign or straightening of the heart, left heart border. This is your left auricular bulge. Second thing is because left atrium is related to the carina. So the carinal angle will become widened. So you can see in this X-ray itself, you can see the carinal angle is widened and the left main bronchus is lifted up. Third thing to remember here is that normally in the chest X-ray, the right cardiac border is formed by the right atrium. But I'm sure all the children today are able to appreciate in this X-ray, you can see a double atrial shadow. This is original shadows because of the right atrium. Now you can even see the left atrial shadow. So this is actually, if you can imagine, this is your enlarged left atrium actually. Okay. So this is your enlarged left atrium, which is causing a bulge in the, left heart border, which is auricular bulge. It is causing carinal widening. You can see a double atrial shadow. And in earlier days, if you do a barium swallow, you would see a posterior displacement of the esophagus because of LA enlargement. So I think these are the most important things, and it is one of the most important questions in your exam to see as an X-ray. So I'll hand back to Dr. Arvind to take it forward.
Thank you, Dr. Sumer. So now we will discuss the ECG finding of different valvular heart disorders. All right. So ECG findings. ECG finding, we should know the basis of pressure changes or basis of the chambers which are affected in a particular valvular heart disease. Starting with the mitral stenosis. In the mitral stenosis, if we'll understand with the help of 4 chambers of the heart. These are the 4 chambers of the heart. Here is left ventricle, left atria, right ventricle, and right atria. Now the mitral stenosis starting from here, so obviously the first chamber to get enlarged or to have a high pressure will be left atria. So the sequence of the changes will be left atrial enlargement. This will be the first change in the ECG. And how we look for the left atrial enlargement, it will be lead V1. So in the lead V1 we will focus and we will get to see this is the P wave. Just before the QRS, this is the P wave. And very well you can appreciate that the negative component of P wave is quite enlarged. Usually the positive and negative component, they are equal. But here the negative component is quite prominent. This is suggestive of left atrial enlargement. And negative component prominence in lead V1, important question, is also known as Morris index positive. Morris index positive. After the left atrial enlargement, the pressure will go to the pulmonary vessels. Pulmonary hypertension will be there, and then there will be right ventricle hypertrophy. So the next chamber to get affected is right ventricle, and we will see the right ventricle hypertrophy. Now V1 is the right-sided lead. So any right ventricle pathology, we will focus on the right-sided lead, that is V1. And right ventricle is represented by the QRS. So there will be the QRS voltage will be increased in V1. Remember, normally QRS is predominantly negative in V1. Here it is predominantly positive, representing the right ventricle hypertrophy. So this sign is obvious in the V1 lead, that in RVH, the R wave in V1 will be more than 7 mm, or we can say a prominent R wave in V1. That is a sign of the right ventricle hypertrophy. And looking at the 4 chamber diagram again, after the right ventricle hypertrophy, pressure will go to the right atria, and then right atria will also enlarge. This is a very, very characteristic feature of mitral stenosis, that we get to see biatrial enlargement, not only in the chest X-ray, but also in the ECG. And how to look for the biatrial enlargement? In the lead 2, height of P wave is less than 2.5 mm. That is a normal height. But here you can see the P wave height is increased. P wave height is increased. So when P wave height is more than 2.5 mm, it is suggestive of right atrial enlargement. So this is a very good ECG to understand all the changes of mitral stenosis. So 3 chambers are affected and left ventricle is spared in cases of mitral stenosis. While looking at the other ECGs of valvular heart disease, like this ECG, again, my advice is when you are getting a question on the ECG, always read the clinical history first. Make your own clinical diagnosis, make your differential diagnosis. Then look for the options. What are the options given to you? And then go to the ECG. What mistake students do, that they start with the ECG and then they get confused. All the 12 leads they have to study. So first clinical history, make your own diagnosis, then go for the options. What are the options given? Then go for a particular lead. Suppose if the clinical history is suggestive of mitral regurgitation. So in the mitral regurgitation, the problem is the blood is going from left ventricle to the left atria, regurgitation. So what it will do, it will cause a left atrial enlargement, as well as blood will come back again to the left ventricle. It causes the ventricle volume overload, left ventricle hypertrophy. So the two signs which we can see in MR is left atrial enlargement and left ventricle hypertrophy. For left atrial enlargement, we will focus on V1 ECG lead, and for LVH, we will focus on the V5 or V6 ECG leads. So here we will get to see the ECG changes of LVH in this ECG clearly. And those changes are increase in the height of R wave in the left-sided leads. That is the V5. So if the R wave is more than 25 mm, either in V5 or V6, this is suggestive of left ventricle hypertrophy. So this is suggestive of left ventricle hypertrophy. Now there is a concept of volume overload hypertrophy or a pressure overload hypertrophy. So in a volume overload hypertrophy like regurgitant lesions, there will be no change in the ST and T wave. ST will be normal, T wave will be upright, no changes. ST and T will be normal. So when in the ECG, ST and T are normal along with LVH. So this LVH is due to volume overload condition. Volume overload condition. While if there is a ST segment depression and T wave inversion along with LVH, so it indicate a pressure overload condition. Pressure overload condition like aortic stenosis, they causes the ischemia-like changes, like strain pattern changes of ST depression and T wave inversion. This is how to make the diagnosis on the basis of the ECG. While if we look at this ECG, in this ECG, we can clear-cut see that in the left-sided leads V5, V6 or V4, there is ST depression T wave inversion, ST depression T wave inversion. So this will be more suggestive of some aortic stenosis condition. So this is known as the strain pattern seen in cases of the hypertrophy due to pressure overload. So this is how to make the diagnosis. Now, coming to the protocol of different valvular heart diseases, you will get the protocol for the severe valvular heart disease, and then to the left-sided lesions, because left-sided lesions causes hemodynamic instability, or they cause more symptoms as compared with the right-sided lesions. So this is a flowchart approach to the treatment. Now, if we look at the mitral valve lesions, severe MS and MR. Now, what is the meaning of severe MS and MR? It is based on echocardiography. Severe MS is the mitral valve area of less than 1.5 centimeter square, while severe MR is the regurgitant jet going into the left atria more than 60 ml per beat. This is a severe MR. Then we will assess for NYHA symptoms of breathlessness if they are more than equal to 2. If the symptoms are yes, more than equal to 2, dyspnea on normal activity, we go for the surgery. While if the dyspnea on exertion is NYHA grade 1, then we look for the complication. And the most important complication of MS and MR is atrial fibrillation. Very important. After atrial fibrillation, patient deteriorate very fast. So if atrial fibrillation is present in spite of NYHA1, surgery will be recommended. If atrial fibrillation is absent, then we will go for a conservative treatment. Now, what is the surgery of choice? In cases of MS, surgery of choice is the balloon valvotomy. For MR, surgery of choice is replacement, valve replacement or repair. While in cases of severe AS is aortic valve area less than 1 centimeter square. While severe AR is the regurgitant jet going into the left ventricle from the aorta, regurgitant fraction of blood, 60 ml per beat. That is severe AR, and these are diagnosed on the echocardiography. We will go for a NYHA same staging, more than 2, patient is symptomatic, yes, go for surgery. If NYHA 1, then we look for the ejection fraction. If ejection fraction is less than 50%, then we go for the surgery. It indicates a left ventricle dysfunction. While ejection fraction is more than 50%, then we go for a conservative treatment. So this is all about the treatment approach in a simplified form for different valvular lesions. So with this, we finish with our clinical case 1, that is the valvular heart disorders.